Well, I want to talk about javadoc now. Javadoc is the way that programmers document their Java code. When Java first was envisioned, one of the things that Gosling did was he looked at C++ and what all the problems were. One of the problems was that the documentation for the code was never near the code. So programmers would be required to update the documentation when they changed the code, but somehow they didn't quite get around to it. So he said, documentation for the code will be right in the code, and the documentation of the code will be the coder's responsibility. So there were a lot of shops where they would have someone who wasn't a coder to write the documentation, which really didn't work. I guess you can kind of understand why you can't document something that you don't understand. So javadoc is generated into HTML pages. When you're in Eclipse, I generated this very smallest possible Java program. When you're in Eclipse and you have this javadoc tab down here, you can open it under Window if you don't see it. You can bring up the documentation for the classes or the methods that you're highlighting in the code. So if you just hover over a string, the name of the class string, you get some documentation for that class, and this is javadoc. So there's more and more and more. It's that's a lot of documentation for the string class. It's a very common class. Or you can scroll through it in here. Or you have another option, you can do Shift F2. Okay, Shift F2 should open a browser and put us into the javadoc for that particular class. So documentation for all of Java, whether you're writing the Java code or Sun/Oracle has written the Java code, it's all done in the same way. And these are generated. These javadoc files are generated using a tool called javadoc.exe. So if you look around over here, I'm still using Java 6. I just haven't gotten around to going and getting this version 7 yet. Here are all of the packages in the standard edition. So some of them will be familiar to you. Java.math doesn't really have much in it. It just has, well, the math class and a couple of others. Where's Java Lang? Java Lang, the only package in all of Java that doesn't have to be imported. It's imported all of the time. It has things like the string class, string buffer, things that are really very common. There's the exceptions in that class. All of this structure for organizing the documentation and the documentation itself, including all of these hyperlinks, are all generated by the javadoc tool. So as the programmer, what you have to do is add the javadoc comments to your code and then generate the javadoc for your project. So the simplest possible Java program, when you make hello world, it actually adds this here for you. And this is a javadoc comment, and you know it because it has /*. So this javadoc comment comes right before the method, so that's the documentation for the method. There should be javadoc comments. I would say there must be javadoc comments for every method, every class, and every field or instance variable in the class. So suppose we it's really hard to convince my machine to double click when it's recording. That's okay. Well, suppose we wanted to generate the javadoc for this project right here. Usually what we would do is we'll have a folder at the same level as source called doc, D-O-C, and we'll put our javadoc in it. So if I look under project and say generate javadoc, this will not be filled in unless you've already done it. So you have to find where your JDK is installed. In the bin there will be javadoc.exe, and you have to navigate around to find that. And then you have to say what do you want, what projects do you want the javadoc generated for. And this is an interesting one. Do you want the javadoc for all of the private stuff, the package stuff? Usually, and the default here is only generate the documentation for the public parts. That may or may not have been filled in for you. It's going to make a doc folder for me in this hello project. So if I just say finish, yeah, save the stuff that hadn't been changed, that had been changed, sorry. So on the console you can see it generating all of the stuff, and holy cow, look at what we got. So there's a whole lot of stuff in here. Let's open the documentation for Hey There. And this is an HTML file, so it looks just like the documentation for the string class, except there's not that much in it. But look at all you get for nothing. We really did no work at all except to say generate it. It pulled out what are the constructors, what are the methods, what are the methods inherited. So there are all of the methods in the object class. So if we had actually typed in some interesting javadoc, it would have been here in the HTML file that was generated. So as your projects get bigger, you can just kind of imagine that if we had 100 classes, you would need to somehow navigate all 100 of them, and probably you would have to be able to see the packages. How do I do that? Well, we only have one package, the unnamed package, so this is not really all that interesting, except to kind of show you how to get started with this. So a doc folder at the same level as source, and we're going to add javadoc to the .java files, and then under project generate the javadoc, and we will get automatically all of these HTML files. You should add the javadoc comments to your work as you go along. Having said that, not too many people do. They tend to leave the documentation to the end, and a lot of times this will be an issue in a code review. So you were supposed to javadoc that and you didn't, go back and do it, or your javadoc comments are too weak, go back and make them more clear. So I know writing descriptions of things is no fun, but at least you didn't have to go and generate that whole HTML file yourself. There's a consolation prize, maybe. I'm not sure. Let's look at if you Google how to write doc comments or javadoc comments, you will come to this page. This is I keep wanting to say Sun, and I have to say Oracle. So this is the reference for writing javadoc, and it is perhaps a little bit overkill for what we need. So the whole philosophy of javadoc is in here. So it's owned by programmers. So here's an example of writing javadoc for a method. So here's the method itself, and the javadoc is from here to here. These things that start with @ are pulled out by the javadoc tool and put in the right place, basically. So you can use some HTML tags in here. I don't really like that. I would rather that people didn't do that. If you want to refer the user to someplace else, like the javadoc for the class image, you can put an @c, go to, that will generate a link, a hyperlink to the documentation for the image class. There's a lot of different shops will treat this in different ways, but I think almost all Java shops say that every method must have a minimum of a description of what the method does. Every parameter must have an @param tag. If it's not a void method, you must have an @return, specify what it returns, and @c is not necessarily required in all of them. So there's an example of javadoc for a method. Okay, so these tag things, the things that start with @, there's a bunch of them. And some of them you don't use all the time. It kind of depends on what the convention is in your shop. For example, the author tag, you put your name in the code. Some shops will refuse to allow you to do that you don't leave in the code who wrote the code. Suppose you get fired or you quit, and then the next person comes along and they see your name there and they try and track you down to find out what you were really doing, or find out why you quit the company or something like that. So the version of the code that you're working in, the version of the file, that's used quite commonly. Param is used all the time, return all the time. @throws or @exception is used all the time that a method throws an exception. @deprecated is used when that particular method or class has been deprecated. Some people use since and some people don't. It's in what version this particular code was created. So in the Java API docs, you'll often see since 1.2. And that's an indicator of when that class or method became available. If you're using multiple ones, and you almost always are, these tags should go in this particular order. The C tag is really, you can make it fairly complicated, and you want to have a way of javadoc allowing of javadoc to generate a hyperlink, so that you don't tell someone see something that you can't find. That wouldn't be nice. So if you do these right, javadoc will go and find the method or the package or the class or the field that you're advising the user to go and look at, and build a hyperlink to the documentation for that. Okay, so this is an important thing. Required tags. We all want to do the minimum, right? Okay, so a param tag for every parameter, and a return tag for every method that returns something other than void. Author tags, it's not critical. Some people say you should put them and some people say you shouldn't. I tend to say you shouldn't. The version, it depends on who you're working for and what the nature of your product is. If you're working for Oracle building the API, they're going to say, yep, you must have a version number and you must have a since. Not necessarily for other people. If you're building a simple application and it's not going to be used by a whole lot of people, so if your code is being reused by other people, if you're building a library of code of classes for other people to use, then you would want to include more of these tags. The deprecated tag is important. When you deprecate something, the compiler will find out whether it should generate a deprecated warning based on the javadoc. And if you have used something that is deprecated, it's really, really nice to tell someone what they should do. So the compiler, if you have the switches turned on correctly, will help you to decide what you should be using instead of the deprecated method or class. And that information also comes out of the javadoc. It's a very, very useful tool. It's the way that Oracle uses to take things out that were rethought of. I won't say they made mistakes, but they have to be able to take stuff out or discourage you from using it and encourage you to use something else. And if that's well done, if it's easy, then people will do it. And if it's kind of a mystery what you're supposed to do, then people won't do it. So the javadoc for deprecated tag is really very important. Default constructors. There's very, very detailed rules of what to do in each of these things. I think for now, what we should do is say every class must be documented and every method must be documented. And as you generate javadoc for your classes, you will kind of get used to how you want it to look. I look at javadoc and someone would write a description in here that says this is the main method. Okay, who could not know that? I could read the code and know that that was the main method faster than I could read that comment. Well, that's not really fair because when you're looking at what is generated from this, you don't see the code. So these are not documentation. This is not documentation necessarily for people who can also see the code at the same time. So if I, this is the second sentence. This is some more detail. And then there's the param tag. Passed into the main. Let's generate the javadoc for that. Okay, when you have a lot of methods in your class, like we saw with the string class, whoops, I wanted to make that smaller, not bigger. That's what I wanted to do. There. Okay, if you have a lot of methods, you would get a one-sentence summary. And then if you click on that, you'll get the detail for that method. So here is typing mistakes and all of the documentation for that method, and it was extracted from our code. So they say that the first period is the end of the summary statement for the method. So you want that sentence to kind of make sense by itself as the documentation for what a method does. And then when someone clicks on the hyperlink, they would see the rest of the documentation of what that method does. Here is the documentation I typed with the @param tag. Okay, so from now on, all of your Java code that you submit needs to be documented using javadoc. You don't need to use all of the tags, but you need to use the tags that are absolutely necessary. So every class needs to have a description of the class. Every method needs to have a description of the method. Every parameter needs an @param tag. Every method that returns something needs an @return tag. The first sentence for the method documentation should make sense by itself because it will appear in the summary as the summary for the method. I did it again. Look at that. There. Once you get used to it, it is really, really helpful. So these things that were popping up, the documentation that you create for your methods, it will pop up while you're using it. So if you create an animal class and then you're in some other file and you say, oh no, I can't remember what I was supposed to pass to that method, just hover over it, and if you were documenting like you're supposed to, the documentation for that method would pop up. So there's the documentation for the method car at. So it's not just the API that will pop up, it's your own documentation that you want to pop up that will help you as your project gets more and more complicated. Javadoc is a really, really useful tool, and I think people only appreciate it if they wasted a big chunk of their life trying to find stuff in old C++ projects. See you next time.